Hello you wonderful Magic players out there, and welcome to the fourth video where we cover the color red and how I would spend my initial wildcards if I were to build a mono red deck. Yeah, let's just jump into it, shall we? Let's have a look at these cards right here. The first one, which is a bit interesting, is Fanatical Firebrand. If you're going for something like a mono red aggressive deck, then I think this is really good. And actually I think a lot of people, when they think about mono red, they only think about the aggressive kind, but in more recent days I've seen a lot of control type mono red deck, and I've actually come to favor that type of deck. So in my final suggestion, when I suggest cards in this video, I'm actually going to suggest that you build into that type of deck. And because that deck uses a few rare cards, I think you need to waste at least four rare cards for that archetype. I actually suggest, if you want to invest into a mono red deck, that you actually spend your rare wild cards that way. It's a bit up to you how you want to do, if you want to build lands or if you want to build a really fun control-y red deck instead. So yeah, Fanatical Firebrand, really great card. Dual shot, actually decent in the current meta. I would actually consider running one. Only a singleton, of course, because when this card is great, it's really great. When you can get two cards off the board for one red mana, it's really great. And there's a lot of one toughness creatures running around. Against mono blue, against mono white, this can often get a 2 for 1. But if you create this, then just a single one is just fine. Moving on, Gito Lava Runner. I think you get 3 of this or something in one of the starter decks, so you only need to create one more. But this is a really great card. It's basically a 2/2 haster late game for 1 red mana, which is great in of itself. And if you drop it on turn 1, it's not too bad either. A 1/2 for 1 red is not too bad. Other than that, yeah, well, there's the if you're going for the enrage kind of deck, there's the Rile card here, but that, I think, works best if you can couple this with green instead, and if you have, enraged dinosaurs with Rile, can work. Basically the only reason I like this card is that it says draw a card, so it replaces itself. And that's why I think it can work great in those kinds of decks. But we're going for mono red, so stay clear of that card for now. Shock, possibly the best mono red card. It works in any archetype. It works in a control deck, it works in an aggressive deck. It's good for everything. It kills Planeswalker, it kills your opponents, it kills your opponent's creatures. Awesome card. The only thing that's bad about this card is that it's not Lightning Bolt, essentially. Shivan Fire is just a worse shock, in my opinion. It can deal 4 damage, but kicking it, then you're paying 5 for a removal. That's a bit sketchy. There's a lot better removal if you want to do that. You can use it as a placeholder. I think you get 2 of these in one of the starter decks, so definitely a good placeholder until you get better cards. But except for that, don't go spending your wild cards on Shivan Fires. Yeah, there is something to be said, I guess, for... There's a lot of cards like this where your creatures gain some ability and you draw a card for 1 red. There's a trample one as well, and there's... maybe you can counter Rile as that one, that type of card. It's basically just a cantrip. But what's great about this card is if you couple this with, for instance, if you have some phoenixes in the graveyard, it's very easy to get off the Phoenix combo where they all return from the graveyard if you have a couple of these cards. So even though these aren't the most useful cards maybe in your deck. Maybe you're not that interested in gaining first strike. Being able to trigger something like the Phoenixes can be really useful. But don't build these unless you're going for a very specific type of deck, of course. Next page. Electrostatic Field. I've seen this a lot in Mono Red, but I think it's one of the weaker cards. The way I think about it is that it's basically only good if you play it on turn 2. And for it to be worth its mana cost, you need to play 3 spells. Because else you could just have, you know, when Lightning Bolt to face would have been a quicker way than the slow Electrostatic Field kind of way. But if you draw this late, you won't have enough. You usually won't have enough spells in your hand to make back the investment that you made. So it's a bit sketchy. It also depends on how many. If you got a lot of creatures in the deck, for instance, then maybe you will never, on average, have enough cards to get 3 triggers out of this. So be really careful and watch your composition of your deck before you start, you know, including this into your deck. Next page, Lava Call. If you use the Game Awards code, you got 4 of these, and these are amazing, I think, in the current meta game. Like, if you look at the most popular decks right now, it kills everything in the most popular decks. There's nothing that I know of that has more than 4 toughness that doesn't also have, you know, hexproof or some other protection. I guess it doesn't kill Niv Mizzet, but then again, if you're up against Niv Mizzet, then targeting it in this way isn't the best way to get rid of it either. So yeah, I don't know. Still, I think this is, if you want to remove cards, like if you're going for the control archetype of red, then this is a really solid pickup, and I think it's a solid 4 of in so many, like in the current metagame, it's so strong right now. Also, why I think I maybe should expand a little bit more why I think this card in particular is so strong, like 4 damage. Why is it so good to a creature? The reason is the second clause, which says that if it dies, you exile it instead, and that's really useful against other red decks, which maybe run, you know, the Phoenix which comes back, and the Phoenix which they both come back, but one come back if you kill it, and one comes back if you play a lot of instants and sorceries, and it kills both of those Phoenixes. And it's also useful against things such as Golgari, which wants to, you know, return their creatures with the find whatever the other side of that card is called. Yeah, really solid card, really good card, especially in the control archetype. Lightning Strike. I mean, it's just a worse Lightning Bolt, of course, but this card is actually really good in a standard environment. You know, you can't expect to have a card as good as Lightning Bolt. They're probably never going to print that again, I think, in standard. It's simply just too good, unless they, you know, give everyone 30 life or something. It's going to be too good. And Lightning Strike is good for what it is. In a burn archetype, it's basically a must-have, I think. Really solid card, and you don't get these in the starter decks, I don't think. Maybe you get 1 or 2 of them. So completing a playset of this, you can't go wrong with that, I don't think. Moving on, what more is there here? Actually, this card. I know a lot of people don't like this, and I think a lot of people try to run this in the wrong archetype. I think they try to run this in an aggressive deck, but the problem is, if you run this in an aggressive deck, your opponent is just never going to block this, ever. So the only way you're going to get this off is if you have some kind of elaborate combo with Ryle or something. And then I guess it works, but what I think is that this could actually work in kind of a controller deck. You shump with this 1 turn, and then you get a 3/3. That's a lot of, you know, shump value in a control deck. And since it's just a 2 mana drop, you don't care too much if it gets kills in the end. If it gets killed in the end, so a really really solid deck in a control mid-rangey type of deck, I think, at least. Moving on. Yeah, we have the Flame of Keld. I was so surprised to see this in the uncommon slot. A lot of the sagas are rare or mythic, but this was actually an uncommon, and it works amazingly great in the burn kind of archetype. The kind of deck which just wants to get rid of its hand, and then burn your opponent out. If you can get this out, you waste your hand, draw 2 cards, and the last part of the saga is where this gets really good, where you add +2 to anything that would deal damage to a player. It says a red source, and that's really important. So this basically makes it so that the card which I was a bit harsh on, the electrostatic field, becomes deadly, because this is a red source. So this deals 3 damage every time you play a red spell. So if you're going to use electrostatic fields, be sure to include Flame of Kelds in your deck, because that's one of the best ways to... If you have the electrostatic field and there's another one which also deals damage whenever you play an instant or sorcery, which deals 2 damage, if you have those 2 permanents in your deck and some burn cards, then you can really burn down your opponent really fast, even if he has access to life gain. It's almost unstoppable if you build up to like a really big turn when you let loose all your red burn cards in one alpha strike. Moving on, Viashino Pyromancer. Viashino? I don't know if that's... What could that even be? I'm thinking if that's like Italian, or almost sounds Japanese or something. I don't know. Anyways, I think this is a great card. It deals 2 damage to your opponent, so it's kind of it's good in the burn heavy kind of deck. And you also start with 2, as you can see in this deck. I think you even get another one, a 3rd one in the start deck. I could be wrong. But completing a playset with this is easy. It's just a common, so why not go for it? Tormenting Voice, really good card if you want to get stuff in your graveyard. Works good with Phoenixes. Solid common card. It's not that great, of course, if you're running a burn deck. I mean, sure, it can trigger the electrostatics and whatnot, but probably too slow in that kind of deck, I think. Moving on, here we have it. Finally. Fairy Cannonade. I didn't know about this card until recently, when I saw a very control-y red list run this, and this is just everything I want from a red card. It really reminds me of, there was like a dual red green card which did 3 to all the creatures on the battlefield, and this is really similar to that, but it's also an instant. That was a sorcery back then, and this sweeps most boards, and it's really good in a control deck, and you can keep it instant speed, so you can keep it till the very end of your turn and see if you need to use it, and you can also use it in response if someone pumps something, or yeah, such a great card. Really like this in a control type of deck. Of course, you're not going to run this if you're on the aggressive, small creature plan, because it will probably kill other creatures. Also, since this kills non-pirate, it goes without saying that this is kind of a must-have in a pirate deck. Fight with Fire. This is an interesting card. You're probably not going to want to run this unless it's a very controller card, and unless you run something like a Primal Amulet or the the mythic one, there's like a gate to something. It's a mythic artifact which gives you mana equal to your life when you flip it. But with in those kinds of decks, this card is really fun. Being able to deal 10 damage and then double that effect with a primal amulet, or you can use it with a Mirari's conjecture or something. Really fun. But for most red decks, it's just an inefficient removal. You're not going to get to 8 mana unless you've already lost the game. So only include this if you have a plan, how to cast this. Don't spend, your plan shouldn't be I'm going to get to 8 mana and then I'm going to hard cast this and it's not going to get countered and it's going to go to your opponent's face, because that, I'm sorry to say, that won't work out. Speaking about great cards, if you have the rare wild cards, of course, Goblin Chain Whirler is, since it came out, it has been amazingly strong. It's an amazing powerhouse, being first striker, dealing 1 to each creature. Like, it's good on its own, being a 3/3 first striker, but also dealing 1 damage is so good in the current metagame. I can't recommend this more if you're going for a mono red deck, of course, because this requires 3 specific red mana. But if you're going for that, it's just an amazing card. Works, I think, even in controller types of decks, since as you see, this has 3 toughness and whoop, Fury Cannonade, only these 2 damage to all creatures. So it's safe to run this out, even if you're running the sweeper with the Cannonade. And if you for some reason have 6 mana, you can sweep the entire board. You can run them out at the same time and deal 3 damage to everything. Yeah, it's just a great card. Nothing more to say. Gutter Snipe, another card which works into that kind of burn strategy. Solid pickup. It even works in a more controlly type of deck. If you have a lot of burn in there, it can work as a win con for that kind of deck. Yeah, great card. Risk factor, of course. You get one of these in one of the starter decks. I can't remember which one, but it's a really solid pickup for the burn strategy. Be careful though. There's a lot of people I've seen online which plays this in a very creature heavy deck, and I think your opponent is just going to take the damage every time if you run a creature heavy deck, because it's much easier to be able to control your damage output if you're running creatures than it is if you're running spells. So this works best with spells, not as good with creatures. At least, that's my opinion. Shake the Foundations. It's not a great card. Deals 1 damage to everything and draw a card, and it's an instant. So great pickup, but compared to dealing 2 damage, that's most oftenly sweeps the board. This is more in a, as the art kind of suggests here, this fits better in a dinosaur deck, dealing 1 damage to each creature, triggering your enrages and whatnot. Unfortunately for this deck, it kind of competes with, it's a 3-drop, so you kind of have high expectations for it, because 3, in my opinion at least, is a lot of mana to pay for a card. It's not that much, of course, but and it also competes with, like, even if you have an enrage deck, wouldn't you rather run the deal 2 damage to everything, because that probably sweeps the board and enrages your creatures? So I'm a bit I don't know about this card. The redeeming factor about this card, of course, is that it has to draw a card, but the low impact and high mana cost. If this was 2 mana, deal 1 damage to each creature without flying, draw a card, then I would be all for it. more is here? There's mostly rare cards here. There's a lot of good rare cards. Oh, Wizard's Lightning. Of course. If you got enough wizards to run this, yeah, this is Lightning Bolt. So, just the most amazing burn card you are going to have available to you if you have enough wizards to run it. Definitely a 4 of them in those kinds of decks. You know. So, what I would suggest is, if you're going for a controller type, which I advocate in this video, go for something like spend your uncommon wildcards on Fairy Cannonade, and then for your common slot, it's a bit difficult because most good red cards are actually uncommon, so there's not that many commons that you can get for your common wildcards. But what I would suggest in that archetype is getting 4 Tormenting Voices, which can help you with your phoenixes, and then also finish, of course, your playset of shocks, and lastly, where do we have it? Get a full playset of Crash Through. Crash Through, of course, doesn't do much unless you have you know, creatures out or phoenixes out or something, but it's a great enabler for that, you know, phoenix archetype. That being said, we're kind of forced to spend at least our mythic wildcards to make this archetype work. I would even suggest, if you want to make this controller type work, to use your rare wildcards, and we're going to use this on something that is actually not too bad to spend your wildcards on, and that's a really good artifact which we can find. Where is it? Treasure Map. Here it is. This is a great way to get stuff, to draw cards, to get you know, card advantage. It's a colorless, so it fits in every deck, and I think it fits perfectly into, you know, a kind of red strategy where you're a bit more controlly. You know, kill off your opponent's creatures and try to go for a big phoenix play, or some, you know, late game burn. So, to summarize, mythic wildcard becomes a phoenix. 2 rare wildcards become treasure maps. Your 4 uncommon wildcards become Fairy Cannonades, and your 8 common cards become Tormenting Voices and Crash Throughs. That's my suggestion for how to spend your wildcards for a mono red kind of control-y kind of deck. Later on, I hope to post a video with that exact type of deck and show you what it can do. Yeah, but until then, bye bye, and thank you for watching.